believe that the Rosicrucian movement began in Germany, based around certain people in the Tübingen area, and that was something that I'm quite happy to like go along with, especially with the Fama being printed there around the 1614, 1615 time, and then perhaps it travelling over to London, and we have the likes of like Francis Bacon and John Dee. But I would like to tell a different story. What if it never began in Germany? What if it started maybe 30 years, 25 years before the Fama actually was printed? What if the the groundwork was put in long before the Fama? Now, that would cause quite a stir if we were able to show that perhaps it never started in Germany. Perhaps the part that Germany played in this was already part of a larger European plan. And that's what I'm hoping to show in this video. The best way to go about this was to systematically collect as many examples as we could, compile them all together so we could filter that information to extract certain types of information that could be helpful. So as of today, our earliest example, and this could change because a lot of more e-libraries are appearing, a lot more copies are being uploaded. I think it's an endless search, but we have found what we believe to be the earliest block. Now, there is 14 very distinct blocks, and sometimes these blocks could have various variations depending if they were fully inked or not. But we have found that block A is the original starting block, and the earliest example for that is 1573 in Geneva by Robert Constantine. Now, it's quite fascinating because the Fama does describe a Rosy Cross brother with his initials to be RC, and it's quite, let's say, convenient that the earliest example of this green man we track back to a Robert Constantine, and is basically using a printer, a Frenchman, an Eustache Vignon. And this gentleman, he is going to use this block A for a number of years, and this person actually disappears in 1588, and basically the printing moves on to his siblings or his relations, but the man actually disappears. There's no time of death for this Eustache Vignon. So block A, 1573, is in Geneva. Yes, and I'm sure some sharp eyes noticed the double A top piece on the front carving. Now this double A, this is the earliest example of this. This is a example of a block or a variation of a block that's been accredited to, well, in circles it's been accredited to Francis Bacon. It is present in some of his works, but it's also present in the Shakespearean sonnets, and it's also present in the Shakespeare's first folio. Now, the thing here is, this is 50 years before these publications. 50 years. Now, that's a generation, really. Now, I would like to try to credit some people. I've not done any work on this AA carving, but online there is a magnitude of information, and I don't know where it originated and things. I would just like to thank the Francis Bacon Research Trust and things like that for making this available, this information freely available. But they speculate that Francis Bacon was actually part of a group, the Knights of the Helmet, who took their names from the goddess Athena and Apollo, and apparently these are known as the Shakers of the Spear, or Spear Shakers. And this is something that was backed up a little bit with Ben Jonson in Shakespeare's Folio when he's saying to shake a lance at the dragon of ignorance. So a lot of people would come forward and say that this AA carving is quite significant, especially to find it at the origin of the Green Man in Geneva 50 years before we see it being used in London. And there is another carving inside here that is very, very familiar. We're really going to have to take a look at. Now, this carving we're going to take a look at is, I like to think, the origin of the pan carving that we can find in the King James Bible. We can find it in the first folio again. So this carving to me is quite important. And if we look closely, we can actually see what I believe to be the origins of the outline of the Green Man and the person with the moustache, which has been highlighted for us. And if you even look a bit closer, what we can see here is now the character on the left and the right. We can really clearly see now that they have horns, allowing us to suggest that Pan is involved. What we were speaking about earlier when we were first interpreting the Green Man. And the arrows that are being pointed by the two at the bottom are pointing to the place where Pan should be situated. And even if we look at the top left and right, we see the two rabbits here and the twirly tail, which is again represented here in the top, having the rabbits on the left and the right. And what we see here is the character in the centre. And I think it's quite a good representation of what the character in the centre is supposed to be. We can even see the letter of the M is covering the garments of the picture which we would see in the Shakespeare's Folio. So I like to think that this this author has managed to actually show us the origins of the Green Man, the origin of the AA woodblock carving, and also the carving that we associate with Pan. It seems to be an accumulation of everything that is going to be used over the next 50 years. So let's take another look at this timeline again from 1573 with the original Block A. Now I think we have this significant base to build from. I think this is a great place to start tracking these blocks and see what happens. Moving on to 1575, we can see Block G making its first appearance in Geneva. So what we have here is the origin Block A, and then in 1575, 2 years later, Block G makes an appearance now, arriving in the same place, Geneva. This would be a Jacobi Alberti, again another Frenchman, I think from Lyon. Basically with Geneva just being across the border, I think it was a more impressive place to print from. Moving through on to 1580, we can see Block G and Block A is still in Geneva, but at the same year, Block G was in Frankfurt and a publication from Paracelsus. And what in the same year, so either the block has travelled there or what we call a sheet cancel, where basically more sheets were printed of the same top or the same tail and then sold or used at a later date or in a different location. Travelling through into 1581, we see that the Block A is still in Geneva. It's still with the original printer and author. And Block G has now moved on to Nuremberg from Johann Nevdorf. And this is a little treatise of music. It's only 2 pages. It's a nice little document. So this would bring us up to 1582. And what we see here is Block A is being used still in Geneva at this time, and it is also being used in Zurich in a publication. But we are going to focus on a new block that has arrived. In 1582, the first occurrence of Block C, the block that we like to call the London block, makes an appearance on the grounds of Artis. And this is basically a mathematical publication that had been published several times. Yet, in this publication, John Dee has actually included or added to this publication. Also in 1582, tying in with this release of this new Green Man, we also have the Green Man appearing in another publication. And this publication is by a Thomas Watson, and this is in the same year. And of course, when we look closely at this book, we can see that we have the AA carving and not the Tempest, even though it is featured in the Tempest, the Pan carving. So we're going to concentrate a lot on this Block C while just keeping an eye on Block A and G in the background to see where they travel. In 1583, what we see is Block C was used again in a publication by William Folk, and this is the defence of the sincere and true translations, basically the Bible being translated from the Latin or the Greek into English. So it was quite a feat at the time. And what we see here, again, accompanying this Block C, is this AA carving again. Now, while this is taking place, Block A is travelled back to Frankfurt and takes place, or is then used with another publication from Paracelsus, Libra de la Vita, and this is by Cornelius Rab. So these blocks seem to be moving to Geneva, back to Paracelsus in Frankfurt, and then back to Geneva again, while Block C, the London block, is taking on its own life. Now in 1584, the Block C appears again in The Discovery of Witchcraft by a Reginald Scott, and again this is accompanied by the AA carving. But more importantly, Block G makes an appearance in London in the Justica Britannica, and this is by a William Cecil. Now, William Cecil is an important man to London, England, as anybody could be. I think the history of William Cecil and the history of the Queen and the history of England is pretty much identical, or so it's been described. If this man had anything to do with this is a kind of gentleman who would have the power to do pretty much whatever he wants. He was probably the second most influential or the second most powerful person in the country at the time. And considering the fact we've got this person in the year before, the Block C finally starting with a John Dee, the spy master, you can quite easily see these two people being able to work together to produce an outcome that would be favourable. And while this is going on in London, what we see is the Block A and the Block G coming together, and these come together in a publication regarding astronomy and astrology by Johannes Reinstein. It's not very often that the two blocks appear together in the same publication. This is quite interesting. Moving on to 1588, we can see Block C is used again, this time by Abraham Franks, and this is again, it carries the AA carving. Block G, again, is still with Eustache Vignon at the time, and what's important to note here is this is the last time that Vignon will appear, or will be in this story. He actually vanishes in 1588, so that's where that part of the story ends. I wonder what happened to this gentleman. This is where it all began with this printer. Now, what we see also is Block A has made its way back to Germany, to Tübingen, where it is used for a Gregorian calendar publication. Now I have jumped to 1591 here, and some really strange stuff is beginning to start with this London block. Now what we have here is the Fortivus Literarum Notice, and this is by Jean-Baptiste Porta, and this is like a reprint of one originally from Napoli, and this is all about cryptology, being able to hide messages using tabula rectas or rota wheels, and some simple methods, some more complicated methods. Now, we need to keep note of this book in 1591 because we're going to get to see some trickery going on very soon. Also released in the same year in 1591 would be Edmund Spenser's The Shepherd's Calendar, having the block C. And again, this is quite an important publication from an English heritage history, where it basically thanks a Philip Sidney. So we're beginning to see this quite an educated circle of some men who have quite a relationship with the others. And to go into the relationships between William Cecil and Philip Sidney, for instance, it would just take too long. So we're just going to concentrate on the books for now. Now, jumping forward to 1593, in London, in the life and death of Jack Straw, what we see here is Block C, and for the first time, Block G has made its way over to London to be used in this very, I'd like to say, obscure stage play. And sadly, the only copy I can get a hold of is a facsimile, and it's in a quite bad condition, despite it being a young print from a block standard. But what we see here also is Block A making its way from Geneva up to Daniel Moglen for the first time. And as you know, we have spoke a lot about Daniel Moglen. And Daniel Moglen will use this block between 1593 right up until the Pandoro Sextiatetus, which we actually spoke about, which I think is 1617. So this was quite an interesting year. We see the two blocks coming together in London, one used in a cryptology book. Then we see the Block A making its way to Daniel Moglen in Germany in preparation, obviously, for the publications that he is going to make. And as I mentioned before, this is where the trickery comes in. Here we have the De Fortivus Literatum Notice again, and this time it's 1593. But this is a pirate copy from the same publisher, Wolf, as before, and it's actually dated 1563. Now that to me is impossible, knowing that the block C that we see here only actually originated in 1573. So it's an obvious and well accepted pirate copy. But what they've tried to do here is quite interesting, changing the timelines. But at this year, when Daniel Moglen, and we've already looked at Daniel Moglen, 1593 has been changed to 1563, basically just turning the 9 around 180 degrees. Now that turning of a number or a letter 180 degrees sounds very familiar for what we're going to do with Daniel Moglen, or what you've already seen with Daniel Moglen, but doesn't happen with Daniel Moglen for another 20 years in the future. So it's actually quite a group of people, and I feel this whole European thing was more connected than people would like to believe. Now, in order to move the video along, we're straying into like the 20-minute territory. I know it's a lot of information, but basically what happens with Block C from now, it starts to be used in Shakespeare's plays, the Quattro editions, and it is used sometimes with the same printer. And there's some interesting things to do with the damage of this block, but in order to move the story on, what basically happens is Block G makes its way to Kessel for the printing of the Fama, or the Fama and the Confession, I think in 1615 or 1616. And in that time, block A is making its way around Europe, being used by some prestigious people and some not so prestigious. And block C starts to be used in Shakespeare publications. Now, it's not exclusively used, it's almost exclusively used in Shakespeare's quartos. It is also used by like Thomas Middleton, who we believe worked in cooperation with Shakespeare in some plays. So, what we like to think is the block makes its way back to be used in the Fama, while the London block is circulated around some various plays, and everything seems to point to London of importance. And as Daniel Moglen says, there is a book M. It is a very large book, and it cannot be found in Geneva, it cannot be found in Frankfurt, it cannot be found in all of these big printing places. But one place it does not mention is London. And what I am putting forward is this book, oh yes, a large book, the book M. I like to think that that M, as we've seen examples before, when turned 180 degrees, would be book W. And I like to think that everything has been pointing its way to plays, and these plays now using block C are pointing towards the Shakespearean plays. So what we're going to take a look at now is perhaps is there some other publications or anything like that that we can piece together to allow a connection with this AA, Francis Bacon and Shakespeare.